what I think is interesting about this argument is that we do have like a clear period of time where, hey, you know, women were staying at home, whatever. Then when the men went out to war, they went towards these jobs, and when the men came back, they didn't want to leave. So to me, to be saying like, oh no, like, you know, they're all in general happier at home. Well, we had a clear period of time where women fought expressly against that.
No, we did, and then we, as I mentioned earlier, we measured against it, and we measured how it turned out, and all but one of the surveys showed that the women became less happy. So I'm totally willing to take these surveys with a grain of salt, but in as much as we can measure them, they undercut your argument.
No. If there was a survey that showed that men are happier just sitting on their ass all day on like some island just watching TV,
they are in the short term.
Do you think that they should strive towards that?
No, because they wouldn't be happier in the long term, because happiness is an objective matter. It's not purely subjective. So like men, though, truly, this is why Genesis 3 is written the way that it is. Men do not want to lord over women. They don't want to dominate women. They don't want to be knuckle draggers. You know what men want to do? They want to sit on the couch and eat potato chips and be left alone. That's what men, that's the broken, dark part.
I'm just saying, I think everyone would be happier in the short term sitting at home on a couch, which is why I think those studies that you're referring to of self-reported happiness refers to that type and not eudaimonia.
I think women would be happier in the short term playing the girl boss and having all sorts of, you know, color-coded notebooks and pens and stuff, but they would find that they don't actually like it. They don't really want to work at the law firm. They don't really want to be in the widget factory. They would rather do something that is more naturally feminine.
I think it's also interesting how you're ascribing these surveys of like self-reported happiness going lower as a result of being in the workplace. When I wonder if you start
and other things.
Exactly. I wonder if when you start looking down into the specific reasons why a person might report greater amounts of unhappiness, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons that could range, right? So for example,
they're all feminists though.
higher, like, let's say experiencing like some sort of like harassment in the workplace, for example, which in that case, it's not necessarily, they're less happy doing work. They're just less happy experiencing harassment, for example.
I'm not saying it never happens, because obviously, you know, you hear some Me Too stories, Matt Lauer, whatever, you know, Vince McMahon. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but these days the law and the culture are so radically opposed to men and in favor of women in the situation. The frequency of sexual harassment in the workplace is basically zero.
Can you give me an example? And the reason why I'm asking for an example specifically is because I actually, as a feminist, think one of the failures of the Me Too movement was not being able to legislate a lot of the grievances put into place. So even if like a company is not supposed to like harass, or you're not supposed to harass your subordinate, whatever, most of these cases will never be criminal. They'll just be at most civil, maybe, if they're even prosecuted.
Sure, but what are we talking about? We're talking about an errant comment, or we're talking about, you know, I like your shirt today, Sally, or something? Or are we talking about, you know, a rape or something?
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking you is, like, what specific laws have been put into place that heavily favor women against men?
Well, there are already
unfairly.
laws. There are laws against sexual assault, right? And there are but the HR practices that have been put into place throughout corporate America to totally favor women. If a woman comes in and says, you know, let's say a man and a woman in an office had a consensual affair. The minute that woman reports it, that guy is gone. That guy is gone at every major company in America. Let's say that a man just kind of seems a little creepy or makes a woman feel uncomfortable because he compliments her glasses that day or something. That guy is very likely going to be gone. The corporate America has so taken the feminist position to heart that men don't even want to speak to women in the workplace. It's one of the reasons that companies often don't want to hire women, is they recognize that their legal liability goes through the roof.
That seems like an exaggeration. Do you actually think that if a guy complimented a girl's glasses,
I'm not saying she would report it, because people are usually nice and men and women generally like each other.
But you think that's how much the institutions have overcorrected, that a man will get fired for just complimenting a woman innocuously?
I think he very easily could be punished for that. Yeah, maybe not outright fired, but he would face professional.
I mean, it'd be cool to see stories of that. I haven't seen anything anywhere close, and I feel like
I don't know.
Any type of conservative media outlet would like jump on that hard.
All I've got are anecdotes here, but no, I don't think the conservative media would, because I'm not pro harassment.
Also, to go back to happiness and feminism and girl bosses and females in the workspace, another reason that women could have lower reported happiness is because they're still shoring up on most of the household duties, despite now also taking up, you know what I mean? They're doing still a lion's share of domestic work.
They don't get married anyway, so they don't even have households.
That's not true. They're still cohabitating. They're still
even within
marriage.
I agree. Cohabitation makes women unhappy too. Yeah.
I mean, even within marriage now, you don't think there's a ton of marriages in which women are also working and then also shoring up a lion's share of the household duties, and that's why they're unhappy, because now they're being burdened in two directions.
Yeah, sure. But so what's the solution to that?
I think
the solution.
I think the
normal
solution is men showing up more on domestic duties, but they won't because of freaking tradcons and neocons who are telling them that it's gay and beta if they do these certain tasks.
It is gay and beta most of the time. I agree.
And I also think that's why men are suffering. So, for instance, like the unemployment rate of men returning back to the workforce is very, very high right now, and that's because everything meninist, like tradcons and neocons. So, for instance,
what do you mean
like
by neo? You mean like the
him.
sort of
Neocons.
warmongering?
What?
You're a neocon?
I'm
you
not
want
a
to go invade
politics
Libya
guy.
or something? What does that mean?
I'm not the politics guy. Okay.
No one can pin
Neocon. I
down
think
Brian.
we're using neocon in a way I'm not familiar with.
Well,
I'm
I'm just
seeing
saying-
John Rumsfeld next to me. Okay.
a lot of just meninists are actually hurting men, and I think they're also
Meninist,
hurting
that's a good
women.
phrase.
They're also hurting women because, like I said, women are doing worse mentally because they're showing up on domestic duties, and men won't take up these responsibilities because it's seen as gay and beta. And we're, you know what I mean? You guys are.
But the solution is an easy solution.
Wait, can I finish?
Sure.
Meninists are kind of pushing for this like revanchist return to just like older times, and even though you claim you're not trying to turn the clock back, a lot of the solutions that meninists are advocating for just won't help men because the burgeoning sectors right now are overly feminized. It's stuff like nursing, childcare, hospitality, and these industries are actually reaching out to men and they're trying to recruit them, but a lot of men will turn them down, and instead they're sitting on their ass. They're addicted to opiates. Like over half of unemployed men are addicted to some sort of painkiller. They're playing video games all day. They're jacking off to porn, which is, yes, one problem, but there's so many others.
Yeah.
And feminism is was telling men, like, you know what I mean, leave your toxic masculinity behind, join a nursing career, join a teaching career, but they won't do it because of tradcons and neocons telling them that they're gay and beta if they do these kind of like unwarrior-like positions.
I don't
Wait,
know. I
there's-
don't. Am
is
I
this
in a
like-
warrior-like position?
What's that movie with De Niro and Ben Stiller? Meet the Parents,
Yeah.
where he's the male nurse.
Yeah.
Do you agree with
I don't think that.
Richard
You don't
Reeves'
think what?
take
You don't
on
think
like
what?
I don't
men
think
should be the way we
track-
pushed women to join STEM, we should be pushing men to join HEAL, which is health, education, administrative literacy jobs. Like, do you think that there should be a push, like instead of saying men do this job and women do this job? Like, I don't think tradcons do as much as like red pill. I'm not pointing to you say you're red pillar, but like that men, your role is to be an ATM machine and to make money and like to be strong and fight. And if you don't do that, then you're not a man. Like, you're not as much of a man if you're a teacher. Do you agree with that?
No, I've
Okay.
had wonderful male teachers. You know,
Okay.
I don't really care to push people to any particular field or other.
Okay.
I think I'm no libertarian, but I think the market will generally sort that out, and I think interference in that regard is usually does more harm than good. But teaching is a very manly thing, actually. You know, I mean, it's you're imparting wisdom and knowledge, and you're shaping a young mind. It's a very manly field.
I agree, but you said women are better at domestic tasks than men are, and
Yeah, being a
lot of
teacher or a
these-
nurse is not a domestic task. It can occur inside the home and frequently does.
And
but-
why does it seem like why do people
Domestic means within the home,
No,
so
but why do
anything
people see
outside.
it as feminine? Like people see nurses and teachers as feminine. Like a
'Cause they're
third
very
grade male
'cause they're very
teacher.
nurturing.
Yeah, so is that
why.
something that you think is better suited for women?
Yeah, I think women tend to be more nurturing than men.
But
So
that's
they're-
because of their experience in the domestic life. That's why they're now more
I think it's
congruent
in
with
their
these
nature.
burgeoning industries such as nursing, teaching, childcare, hospitality, food preparation. It's because of what they're being trained to do at the home. So when tradcons say that like men should focus on public life while women should focus on these more domestic errands, they're actually hurting men in the long run because now men aren't equipped to do these burgeoning industries.
No,
to work in them.
I think also, don't forget, life isn't just set and static all the time. A woman could say go to school and then work a job. I don't know. She teaches for a few years and then she gets married and she wants to leave teaching, or she's a nurse for a few years, or what. We don't just like sign up like serfs for the rest of our lives. We're just doing one task. But I do think that it's not just a matter of social construction. I think women are more nurturing, and so are nurses more likely to be women? You know it. Are elementary school teachers more likely to be women? Yes. There are some men, but very few.
that's interesting to say, because when we look historically, like the reason why women tended to take those roles is because those were the only roles that society would let them take. It was not
So says you.
necessarily-
I don't really buy that.
No, we can like look
There's
at the laws
a
right
study,
now.
the last name was Wu on the researcher, where like if right now we have like a certain percentage of women in STEM and a certain percentage of men in like HEAL types of jobs. If people were actually choosing based on their interests, you would still get more. You're right, but it would be like 30% men.
But people are often deluded by their interests, and people have a view of what they will excel at and what they're inclined to do that is often out of step with reality, and virtually no
and
one.
probably influenced by what society tells them they'll be good at.
Totally.
Which is that
But
men should
ironically,
be teachers.
I think we all concluded earlier that today it's the liberal feminist view that dominates all the major institutions, right? Didn't we? Yale,
No,
and all
I
the rest.
think,
So when
I
men,
thought that's what we said
when men
earlier.
cite not wanting to join nursing and teaching as part of the reason is because they see it as very feminine. You think liberal feminism is the culprit and not meninism or neocon/tradcon?
It's the neocon thing keeps shaking me because neocons refer to like Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz.
Okay, we'll just say
like,
conservative. Do you think when men say that they don't want to join nursing and teaching, because the nursing programs and teaching programs have like put out, research of why men won't join these industries despite them reaching out, and one of the biggest reasons is because they feel like it's overly feminine. Do you think that's due to liberal feminism or due to conservatism, that fear?
No, I think it's just natural. I think it's just a natural thing about men. They are not inclined toward the those more nurturing professions.
But the alternative is they're sitting at
mentioned
home
was the
unemployed
opposite.
right now. They're
Yeah,
reaching out to unemployed men. It's not men in STEM. They're reaching out to men who are disaffected right now, and they
maybe-
won't do it still because it's seen as gay.
Yeah, I think the men should work, but they should maybe do things that they're more inclined to do. I don't think we need to conscript men to go become nurses wearing frilly little dresses.
And
But they're
critique
not
of
more
liberal
inclined to do
feminism.
because, manual labor jobs are basically getting eradicated, and a lot of these men, to be mean, aren't necessarily smart enough to go into STEM. So I think other industries might be better for them,
look,
but
there
they
are all
won't
sorts
do
of
it. They'd
social
rather
problems.
sit at home to preserve their masculinity, and I think conservatism is to blame for that.
I think mass migration is actually to blame for the problem of the working classes not having as much employment as they used to, which is something that conservatives generally haven't pushed. I think there are all sorts of political reasons that happens, but I don't think that any amount of feminist indoctrination and brainwashing is going to convince a man that he really wants to do an extremely feminine role.
It's not about really wants to do, that's an
Just,
entitlement.
yeah,
look,
it's not
just
gay
go
for
work.
doing. That's a different.
I think
like,
men-
and a critique
men ought
of
to
liberal
work rather than
feminism is
not
that
work.
liberal feminism has done a lot to push up women, but it has left, I think, men behind in a lot of
Sure.
ways, and this is one of those.
Also,
ways.
we're painting with way too broad a brush. I mean, a man can be a nurse, and there are aspects of the nursing profession that can be perfectly masculine. And same goes with teaching. But if we want to zoom it out even further and say, well, these loser men who are all addicted to opiates and they're just like, sitting around with porn, these guys need to get off their behinds and take the only job available to them, which is to put on a frilly dress and be a girl. I think that's a ridiculous, false dichotomy.
But why do you see that as putting on a frilly dress to go into like nursing and hospitality?
Because you're using that example.
You're presupposing that it's feminine and gay. You're doing the thing.
It is more feminine, yeah.
It's frilly dressy to go into nursing. That's
They
what
wear
you're, that's
frilly
what you're
dresses.
telling
At
your
least they
audience
used to.
here. You're telling them that they're preserving their masculinity to sit at home, and half of them being addicted to painkillers.
I'm telling you, I think it's a false dichotomy. And I think the reason that you're picking those fields, which are...
Those are the most burgeoning 15 sectors right now. A lot of other things are getting wiped out.
nursing is like a good.
What are
field
the
to
other?
go into.
What are the other 15? What are the other 13?
Janitoring, nursing,
Okay, janitoring's
teaching,
not
childcare,
not traditionally
hospitality,
considered-
food
hospitality is not
preparation.
food preparation. That's not true.
So which ones are frilly? Just outline
Let's
it
make
for
it
me.
a graph.
Which
and
ones are
put them
gay?
in the
So-
food.
spectrum of-
like Emerald Lagasse, right?
Which
who's
one's
in food-
most dick
Yeah,
sucky?
Emerald Lagasse is not. That's not too frilly. If you're a big man chef, you just like bam throwing. That can
Don't
be
you
pretty
feel like you're
masculine.
hurting men with this
Being
kind
a
of rhetoric
janitor.
of being like, you need to add so much machismo to these professions? Be like, okay,
I'm
maybe
not
you should
adding
do this
anything.
type
I'm
of
not
job.
adding
See if it's
anything.
frilly.
I'm
Yeah, you are.
observing reality and articulating my perception. The reason you chose nursing is because you know that it's a generally
I said
a more
nursing,
feminine field.
teaching, childcare, food
Right.
prep.
Well, there are plenty of male teachers. They tend to be more at the little bit more at the middle school level, then more at the high school level, then many more at the college level. That's true. Where those teaching jobs require much less nurturing and a lot more just reciting facts and logic.
So, okay, I just want to ask, do you think it's better for a guy to sit at home and be unemployed than go into nursing? Like,
No,
do you
I
think
think
he's doing
it's
something
better.
wrong?
I think it's better to work than not to work, as long as the work is not intrinsically
But ideally,
immoral.
they shouldn't pursue nursing because it's gay.
They can pursue whatever they like to pursue, but you're asking me why are these men not inclined to pursue careers that
calling
they
it
consider
frilly,
feminine?
yeah.
Because they're men, and because the differences between men and women are natural, and they're not contingent on what you say, and they're not contingent on what I say.
Okay, my question is that, again, if these things are so natural, and we can search it up right now if you don't believe me, but why have there been laws in place preventing women from working in fields that are not nursing or teaching historically? If this is a biological imperative, there would be no
I'd be
need for
curious
these
to know-
laws.
I'd be curious to know which laws. I'm not disputing that women have been encouraged to stay home, and that that socially that's changed because of the Second World War or because of the advent of the revolution and contraception and all of these other things. That's certainly true. But I think that for a long time, we recognized that the family is the building block of society. And so we wanted to encourage family formation and family stability. And part of family formation and family stability is someone being able to raise the children, someone being able to take care of the home while the other partner was outside of the home. And you might say, well, why can't the man stay home with the kids and why can't the woman go to work? Yeah, it can happen. They're just generally not inclined to do that because women are the ones who have the babies and who are much sweeter with the babies and who are much more responsive to the baby's needs. And men are the ones who generally are a little bit more outgoing and a little bit more publicly
You've
oriented.
been very nurturing to Kiki.
I have. I even gave her one of my precious Mayflower cigars, available at mayflowercigars.com, but you have to be 21 years old or older.
It's like, I actually like what you guys do. I watch it because I like to hear different
Stop it, go
opinions.
on.
No, I
Come
like
on.
to
We're not that
listen to
handsome.
different
Come on.
opinions and stuff, but I have no problem with you getting on and trying to advocate for like getting rid of things like no-fault divorce. Now, if you guys passed a law, like I think you should have the complete right to do that, convince people, but passing the law is a very different thing.
Well, you'd have to pass a law if you're talking about a law, right? You're talking about,
yeah,
right?
but I think it's much different to try to get people to not get divorced or advocate for that position.
Well, look, I think everybody, unless you're the most hardened radical feminist maniac, you don't like divorce, right? You're not saying we want more divorce.
But I
are
think
you?
people should have the freedom to
Right,
get
so
divorced.
you're merely talking about the right. And so I guess my question then is, put aside legal divorce for cause. What is gained by no-fault divorce? What's the good of that?
Oh, there's a bunch of good when it comes to no-fault divorce. Previously, when we had fault divorce, people would literally have to like lie or commit vices in order to be able to get divorced. So whether it was like,
Why don't they just not get divorced though, if there's no fault?
the problem is if they decide to like not get divorced, usually that leads to like higher rates of unhappiness. It leads to people having like more tension within their marriage. There is
Does it?
tension.
I don't know. I'm not convinced of that.
Well, yeah,
Again, because I think happiness has declined for everybody, and especially for women over the time that we've had these
Yeah,
laws.
but we can look at people who reportedly stay in marriages where they're unhappy and like the long-term effects of that, even like psychologically, health-wise. We can look at abusive relationships, situationships where the woman feels like she can't leave, even in an era of no-fault divorce.
That would be fault, right? That's not no-fault divorce.
Yeah,
That's like my husband punched me in the face.
The problem with fault divorce, right, is that you're already instituting like a burden of proof onto like these victims that would basically prolong the process of them getting away from their abusive partner, right?
You could
that
separate and you could move out, the same night.
So basically you're saying that you're okay with advocating for a system where they're basically not married in all the ways that matter, but just not legally.
I don't know what matters.
Well, they're not living together.
we're-
They're not being intimate together. Their children are in basically separate homes because you're saying the woman can leave, but she
I'm
cannot
opposed
divorce.
to divorce, but we're speaking specifically now about no-fault divorce, because we're probably not going to agree on divorce broadly, but we might at least agree that no-fault divorce is very, very bad. Because you're saying, well, if one is not able to have a no-fault divorce, then they might have to stick with that spouse that they don't like that much, or the spouse got kind of fat and I don't like him anymore, whatever. But first of all, it's definitely better for the kids, in as much as the studies are reliable on this. Kids who grow up in a home of a mother and a father bound together in marriage do better across every single criterion. But furthermore, you're neglecting the negative aspects of divorce. I mean, when people do get divorced, and then if they have kids, and God forbid they get divorced, then if you introduce a stepfather into that relationship, the odds that those kids are sexually assaulted go through the roof. The odds that and actually, at a more basic level, because we could rattle off the statistics all day, at the basic level, we recognize that the marriage is the fundamental political unit. The liberals say the individual is the fundamental political unit, but I think that's bunk. I think it's the family, because political means multiple people,
But just to go on the data really quick, I mean,
Yeah.
they're staying in a household with conflict is worse than.
But
for
they'll
children
have the
for-
conflict in divorce. I mean, this is
No,
divorce
but
is in a way
no.
not
It's
possible.
the
every single
yeah,
day.
it's better for yes, you're right. But also when you factor in education and socioeconomic status, a lot of that dissipates. So what's happening usually is that poor people are more likely. So it's all jumbled up.
Poor,
but also
poor people are less likely to get married in the first place, and more
that's
likely
true.
to have
That's
kids
true.
out of wedlock.
But being a child in a home with conflict between the parents is worse than having.
Right, but then why isn't the answer resolve the conflict?
Because
rather
people
than-
can't. We're human beings. You're the one who talk about human nature.
Yeah, but
human
I think-
nature. We're clearly not successful at staying with one person forever.
We
and
have
not
been
having-
at much higher rates in the recent past. So, unless we're suggesting that no one can progress, that no one can improve their behavior, then I think we can get better at that. And I think part of the reason why divorce rates spiked is because the law encouraged divorce rates to spike. And because, to give the red pill guys their due, because family courts have been horribly unjust to men, and because we have a liberal idol in our society of radical individualism that says, who cares what happens to my spouse or my kids?
When in recent history were we really good as a human species on lifelong, healthy bonds? Like, serial monogamy
in the
seems
United
to be
States?
what we're good. I don't, but this thing, you don't know just because of someone staying together. Like, there's a lot of people who had parents that stayed together that are all sorts of messed up because the parents fought, there was alcoholism in the house. There's all types of things.
They're all bad things
just
that
people
can happen.
staying together isn't isn't a good metric for childhood well-being.
Well, it's a good predictor of outcomes, but I totally grant to you that, there are bad marriages. I just think if the law is then going to intervene, the way the law has intervened is by dissolving the marriages and creating all sorts of incentives to get divorced and to not get married in the first place. But if the law is going to intervene because of all these problems, why wouldn't the law intervene to make marriage more sustainable,
Well, the law isn't really
encourage marriage?
The law really isn't intervening per se. People are choosing whether they want to apply this law to their life or not. So people are choosing that they want to get divorced or choosing if they want to work things out. The difference is that now you have a choice on whether you think the person you're with is actually somebody you can continue having a sustainable relationship with.
But
if the answer is no, then
to quote Simone de Beauvoir, that famous feminist, if you give people a brand new choice, if you give people a preferable choice, given their social circumstances, they might just take it.
And women fare off this idea that women are, like, to fight back on the red pill, that women are just incentivized to divorce. Women fare off far worse financially after divorce. They're way more likely to seek government assistance, be in poverty.
Totally.
They're less likely to repartner. So this idea that women are just running to the divorce court to get money is just not true.
Well, no, they are divorcing at much higher rates. That's undeniable. And I'm totally with you. Divorce is horrible for women. So sometimes feminists make the argument that I think perhaps we were getting to a little earlier, the argument that you just contradicted, which is, divorce is so good for women. It's a wonderful choice. They really need to have this choice. It makes their lives better. No, it doesn't. Basically, all the time, it makes their lives much worse, to say nothing of the ways that it harms their children.
Well,
and harms
no.
society
What
against
it's,
the fundamental political unit.
what it's basically saying is that if a person is willing to take all these worst outcomes, like economically, socially, whatever, imagine how bad that relationship must have been.
Or imagine
that
how
a woman
diluted.
decided, like, hey, you know what? Instead of like trying to continue this, it is so toxic and so unhealthy that this is a better alternative.
Or they have been diluted by a lot of propaganda over the years,
Look,
which is that divorce is good.
You seem very sane. I'm sure you and your wife have really great ways of communicating and resolving your conflicts. Do you know how crazy people are? Like,
they can be.
Yeah, like crazy. To say that that's going to work for everybody and everybody should just stay in this when people are not emotionally even mature enough.
Look, I certainly style myself Prince Charming, so I'm glad to hear that we all agree. But you're right. Maybe people engage in more vicious and harmful behaviors. So I guess my question is, if we agree that certain cultural practices can make people behave better, and certain cultural practices can make people behave worse, shouldn't we be doing everything we can to make people behave better? And that's what we did in the classical political arrangement of society, right? You know, the basic point of politics is do good and avoid evil. Then, under liberalism, you had a new point of society. The new point of society was to just expand individual autonomy maximally, on the, I think, false supposition that would make people happier. And we've had a couple hundred years now, and we've seen how it's played out, and it hasn't played out very well at all. So why don't we go back to the one that worked for all of human history?
So, one, do you think that's possible or going to happen? And two, would you then be in favor, because education, female education, seems to be a big predictor of, one, we're the only ones whose marriage rates are not falling, they're going up, and we're less likely to get divorced. So do you then, would you advise women, instead of getting married really young and living this traditional lifestyle, to maybe go get educated
the best predictor of women staying married and flourishing and having lots of kids and being happy and not even trying to get divorced, it's not education, though education is some predictor of that.
Big one.
It's religion.
Yeah, you're true, but you can't make people. We're just becoming less religious as a society. This thing you guys have, where let's turn the clock back. Let's turn the clock back.
I don't want to turn any clocks back. I just want to turn our heads back to reason.
You can't make
and reason
people
is founded
believe in
logic,
something.
Who is God?
Yeah, exactly. But the logic and the reason and the age of information, a lot of people now have access to it, and they're going, actually, this kind of seems like bullshit. And they can't. You can't make.
No, I don't think that's why people have become irreligious. I don't think it's because they've all gotten much better educated and read a lot more books.
They read Christopher Hitchens. I agree with you.
No, I think they heard a Christopher Hitchens video once, and which is
it's undeniable that more and more people are identifying as non-religious, that this is just the trend that it's going in. And I don't know how much, as great as the Daily Wire is, how much you guys are going to be able to reverse that. So maybe we should look at how we can move forward with the society we have, instead of trying to turn the clock back in a way that
But it's not a clock. It's not a clock. We're not going. I'm not making a time machine. I'm just saying that there's truth and there's falsehood, and we are embracing a lot of falsehood in society, and that's leading to a lot of ugliness and a lot of depravity. And if we want less of all that stuff, and we want more like good, true, and beautiful things, maybe we should use our reason to recognize really basic things like God exists. I'm not telling you you've got to come to traditional Latin Mass tomorrow. You could wait until Sunday. But, at the very least, we should recognize, hey guys, some things are better than others, right? The minute you grant that some things are better than others, ultimately you have to grant that there is a maximal good, a summum bonum, who is God, right? We should recognize, hey guys, effects follow causes. And if you go back on the list of causes far enough, there's going to be an uncaused cause, who is God. And
There's really great arguments against
Jasmine,
this.
before I...
Well, and also
I totally agree.
Something you said in the beginning about individualism, like, do you prefer sociocentric countries? Do you not love America? And the
What do you mean sociocentric?
Like countries where, like, you're like, oh, part of the problem with feminism is so focused on the self. Well, I think that is one of the cornerstones of, like, Western civilization, is instead of being
it's a very liberal view of Western civilization.
Yeah, which I think is what makes Western civilization so wonderful. Like, we are one of the only, I think we are, like, the only one founded on individualistic rights, like principles that we...
I don't think we really are founded that way. I think that's what people say we were founded on now. But, you hear a phrase like liberal democracy. That's the popular way to describe our country now. That phrase appears basically nowhere in the English language until the 30s. Then it jumps a little bit in the 40s. It really doesn't take off in English literature until the 80s. America, the Founding Fathers didn't think of us as a liberal democracy. They were influenced by some Enlightenment thinkers, John Locke and Montesquieu say, but they were also influenced by the classical tradition. And the classical tradition is one of the common good, not in the communist sense of that. But again,
They thought the common good was best pursued by having individual rights instead of, like, that's one of the reasons we founded ourselves on a separation of church and state. You have the right.
We were not founded on a separation of church and state.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into that. I think
Sure. It's incidental to this point, but it appears in no founding document. There's one errant letter from Thomas Jefferson to a friend that mentions the phrase, and the Treaty of Tripoli makes some little knock on Christianity to appease the Muslim pirates who were capturing our sailors. But when the First Amendment established no church at the national level, the reason for that is not that there was a firm separation of church and state. It's because there were already established churches at the state level. In many states that persisted for decades after the Constitution.
The only reference to God in the whole thing is that you can't have a test for political office. They
I'm just
purposely
saying,
left it out. You're saying that they didn't need
no, they didn't
to
leave
found
it
this
out.
state.
They refer to religion explicitly, and they say we won't have a church at the national level because we have churches established at the state level.
It says that? Where does it say that in the Constitution, that we're only doing this because we have churches?
Not only doing that, but we can see it in history and in the ratification debates. That's why in a number of states, for decades after the ratification, you had established churches. And this changes through 19th century jurisprudence, unfortunately, but that has nothing to do, obviously, with the founding of the country. Furthermore, you have in the national anthem, which also comes from the 19th century, the notion that this be our motto and God is our trust, which is from a forgotten verse of the Star-Spangled Banner. You also have it in our money. You also have it in the benedictions and the invocations of the Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention. So you also have it in the speeches of George Washington. And so, John Adams says that the American government will be based on the Christian morality. John Jay, first Chief Justice of the United States, says the same thing. He goes even further.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a bunch of quotes I can pull out from the other side. You can.
There aren't really.
Franklin. Yeah,
there aren't. There's one from Thomas Jefferson.
God took the Bible and cut out every reference to the supernatural and kept the rest for wisdom.
Thomas Jefferson did make a commentary on the Bible and his views were a little odd, I grant you, but I've already granted to you that in a private letter, Thomas Jefferson advocated for a separation of church and state.
And our Constitution does, right? There's there's a separation of church and state.
Where?
You have
The First Amendment.
Where do you see?
Congress shall make no. I mean, I can pull it up. We can read it word for word.
Right.
But I mean, like, it is there. We didn't just all
Let's just read it.
This. Yeah.
Listen, I didn't go to law school, so.
Okay.
While she looks that up, one of the other questions I wanted to get into.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting free exercise thereof.
Right. So now where do you
Congress
see a
shall
separation of church and state there?
Well, when you say Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that is that separation.
Right. And so what is the Congress?
the federal government. Is that what you're saying? So you're
It's
saying
it's the lawmaking body for the federal government, right?
Yes, but if like
before the incorporation
if
doctrine
the state of
incorporates it into the
California starts to be like, actually in all our schools we're going to start enforcing Christian ideology in our public schools, that would be unconstitutional under this First Amendment.
In fact, that was the way that basically all schools operated in the country until the middle of the 20th century.
Until the Supreme Court said that you can't have
prayer in schools and you can't teach the Bible.
because of the First Amendment.
Well, no, the middle step was the incorporation of the Bill of Rights to the
Okay,
states,
sure,
which
but
was,
that's been incorporated unless you
Right.
don't want that part.
Right, but you're just saying the country was founded on the separation of church and state. I'm saying that wasn't even brought up as a matter of jurisprudence until many
Because it didn't
decades
have the
later.
words
And then it wasn't
to
enforced
say.
in schools until a century after that.
Yeah, because no rights were, right? That's what the incorporation.
No, I
I
think
guess
there
I'm
were
just confused.
rights.
Do you believe the Bill of Rights is like a founding document or not?
The Bill of Rights is
Yes.
a list of 10 amendments to the U.S.
Yes.
Constitution.
Do you believe it is a founding document when it comes to like basically the United States as a whole?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then, to me, I don't understand why the conversation is continuing, because if you believe the Bill of Rights is integral to the founding of this nation, and the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment states that no religion shall be.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I think
Congress
I think
established-
you're misunderstanding what that phrase meant to the people who wrote it and the people who lived under that government.
It just seems to me, where would the misunderstanding be? The
I
whole
think
idea is
you're
that-
misunderstanding that the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states at the time, and the lack of an establishment of a church at the national level does not imply that there cannot be an establishment of a church at the state level, which we know for a fact there was at the time of ratification.
I guess I am a little bit confused, because I don't understand if the Bill of Rights is part of the federal, basically legislator, right? It's part of the federal law.
But we have a
and we are
federal
under,
system.
yeah, but the whole point of creating the Constitution, and according to the Federalist Papers as well, is that, oh no, we need some like overarching law that, you know, goes throughout the nation, so that way that we can be a united nation.
Not exactly. So federalism, right, refers to the principle of subsidiarity, to the view that there would be different levels of government, frankly, all the way down to the individual, right, and the family and the community and the state
Yeah.
and the national government. So certain powers and rights were reserved to the federal government, but they were relatively small at the ratification of the Constitution. And then many, many rights and laws and powers were reserved to the states, and then some were reserved to the people.
So do you think it's bad that the First Amendment now applies to all the states?
Let's try to keep it a little more
Feminism,
focused on
okay.
this. Are women oppressed? Are men oppressed? Who is more oppressed? And I think let's start with Michael on
Sure.
this, and then we'll switch over to you guys. Go ahead.
Yes, women are oppressed, men are quite oppressed, but what oppresses us is not, like the patriarchy or whatever. What oppresses us is sin and vice. That's what actually does it. True freedom is not, as the feminists and the liberals who preceded them would believe, the ability to do whatever we wish. The right to do wrong. I don't think there's any right to do wrong. I think that's why the word is called a right. I think that liberty is the right to do what we ought to do. And so I think that the truth will set you free, and I think that falsehood will enslave you. And I think that the real oppression we see today is a result of following our appetites, our lower will, disconnected from our rational will. So, I go out and eat a lot of donuts, or I shoot up a bunch of heroin or something, and I am addicted to porn, or I'm sleeping around with all these women, or I'm even, forget about porn, I'm just indulging my pride on social media, and I'm just doom scrolling all day and not doing any of my work. Those are oppressions because you can't escape them. Even when your rational will says, I've had enough drugs, I've eaten enough donuts, I've looked at enough porn, your appetite comes back in and says, give me more, right? And so you lose your freedom. To quote St. Paul, the things that I want to do, I don't do, and the things that I don't want to do, I do.
So we are oppressed by patriarchy, because didn't you define patriarchy as like male sexual appetite and things like hookup
No,
culture?
I think patriarchy truly is just, the reflection and the symbol of marriage, of the relation between Christ and his church.
Oh, because previously you defined it as things like hookup culture and...
No, I said that we live in a patriarchy in as much as women are not dominant over men, right? And so I agree that women are still bearing the brunt of a lot of terrible things, but it's a perverted patriarchy, were my exact words. And so the true one would be the notion that man is the head of woman as Christ is the head of his church, which makes a lot of liberals shriek these days. But the way that this perverse patriarchy would be practiced today is that man is not like Christ to his church. Man is like a little demon in the Garden of Eden tempting Eve.
So you define current oppression as basically modernity, like things like you said, social media, pride, gluttony, lust.
No, I
things
think
like that.
I think real oppression really can only come from sin. I think and the wages of that are death. And so, the law can come in and act in a way that is contrary to justice, and that does happen a lot. But that doesn't really matter. You can be free in a prison cell. The problem for us, the far greater threat to our liberty, is the lack of ability to control ourselves and to live virtuous, flourishing lives. And you can't just blame some guy on TikTok for that. You can't just blame a law for that.
So did you want to respond?
Yeah, I guess I
Yeah.
had a question. I do want to ask if you think religion is really good at suppressing that like proclivity for vice, and you would probably label
Not all
something.
religions, but-
You would probably label something like pornography consumption as unequivocally a vice and something that oppresses us. Then why is it that in states that have the most evangelical Christians, we see the highest subscriptions to things like Playboy, Pornhub?
They still have Playboy.
hookers?
Playboy's wholesome.
I'm
these
just
days,
painting
isn't
more of a
it,
relatively progression. It went from like obviously Penthouse to Playboy to Hustler to now, then to the strip clubs, pornography, restaurants, things like that. Why is that most rampant in red states, specifically religious red states?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't speak specifically to evangelical Protestantism because I'm not totally, I'm not one, and I'm just not as familiar with it. I do know that in some of the Protestant denominations, they get a little bit more loosey-goosey on this stuff. Obviously, the Lambeth statement permitted contraception and a little bit weirder stuff for some Protestants. So I remain a mackerel-snapping papist, and I kind of believe the old-fashioned way that, to quote the great philosopher Norm Macdonald, sex is a filthy, shameful thing that should only be for the purpose of procreation within marriage. So I don't know, if you say, well, in Utah or something, they're looking at porn more, and therefore the Mormons are, hypocrites. Okay, maybe they're hypocrites. First of all, Utah just effectively banned porn because they forced porn companies to have an age, and Pornhub, very tellingly, said, okay, we're not going to do business there anymore because we rely on kids for our business.
I guess my point is it doesn't seem like religion is a compelling antidote against the vices that you deem to be oppressive. If in these states that have the highest populations of religious people, your type of religion, Christian, why is it that they're indulging in these vices more disproportionately than liberals?
Well, again, I love my Protestant friends, but some of them take a looser view of sexual morality than the Catholics do. The Catholics still have a very rigid view. So I think you're making a little bit of an apples and oranges comparison. Yeah, but furthermore, to quote La Rochefoucauld again, hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue, and religion is a public thing. So we want to pray. We can pray individually. We can avoid looking at porn individually. We can do whatever individually. But we're social creatures. And so if we live in a community that is more likely to put us in the near occasion of sin, we're more likely to fall into that. Today, porn is everywhere, right? You can't drive down the street. You certainly can't open social media without that. And if there's more temptation everywhere, you're more likely to fall into it, even if you know it's wrong. And so now we point to those people, we say, well, they're hypocrites. No, they're not hypocrites. They're human beings who have a standard and fall.
You think they're
fall short of
victims
it.
to like just the rampant porn industry?
Yeah, I think the porn industry certainly victimizes people.
Do you think porn worsened it more than prior? Like, do you kind of blame the porn industry?
Yeah, I think porn industry is awful and should be wiped off the face of the earth.
Can we talk about what consequences you're seeing since the proliferation of porn that makes society so much worse?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, well, you see, again, to go back to all those studies, you see a big spike in sexual aggression. You see a big spike in...
Wait.
No,
crime
there's
is
been
down
a
since
decline
since
of rape
porn,
since
early
pornography
2000s?
spiked.
Crime is
Rape.
way down.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
And
And
rape is way
domestic
down.
violence.
Yeah,
And abortion is way down.
Yeah.
Seems like it's
abortion, no. Abortion,
from the early 2000s, yeah.
abortion is unfortunately slightly up even after the Dobbs decision, though if you go into the state-by-state data, babies still have been saved, and it's somewhat complicated.
But since porn became widely available, what's worse? Because it's not violence.
So what you're saying is, because there's porn now, people are getting married less, they're having fewer babies, they're getting pregnant
I'm
less,
not even
and maybe
saying
they're having
causation.
fewer
I'm
abortions.
just saying if porn just made society just so catastrophic, what are the outcomes you're seeing? Because it's not violence.
Yeah,
Well, I think you would say porn is bad as an end in itself, right?
Yeah, it's intrinsically
Yeah.
evil, but also if you're interested in some studies or something, and again, I don't even really buy studies, but I think it was 2010 out of the University of Arkansas, a survey of the most popular porn, not all porn, but the most popular porn videos showed 88% depicted sexual aggression, verbal or physical. There was a study that came out about 10 years ago out of Denmark that showed that regular porn use increased misogynistic attitudes, which I totally agree. There was another study that came out of, I think it was Indiana, a few years ago, which showed that regular porn consumption was correlated with sexual aggressiveness in both men and women, which I don't think is a very good thing. And then there was another study, I forget which state it came out of, in like 2015 or 2019, which showed that porn use and sexual interactions online for women were a reliable predictor of in real life sexual violence committed against them. So again, I grant you that
there's a bunch of
you've got your
studies in the
studies, I've got my
opposite
studies.
direction, yeah.
But there, in as much as you do believe the social scientific data, there is a lot of evidence that porn has had disastrous consequences.
Pixie, you had something I think a little bit before this. Go ahead.
Yeah, basically, earlier when you were saying like, oh no, people are doing porn or watching pornographic content more often because they're surrounded by it, they can't help it. So even if it comes to a virtuous person, if they're surrounded, they're still going to fall prey to it. But to me, that doesn't necessarily track, and I don't want to be offensive here, but the Catholic Church, especially priests who are supposed to be surrounded by those who are holy, tend to have like some of the highest rates of like child.
No, they don't. I mean, there's obviously a child crisis. It was 20 years ago, especially in the Catholic Church.
And even recently, if we looked at like the past like 10 years, like enough has been done.
Obviously, there's a lot of media attention on that, and it's a terrible problem. But if you compare rates of child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church to any other religious community, among Christians, it's flat. It's exactly the same as the Protestants. Among certain Orthodox Jews, it's actually significantly lower. And then my favorite statistic here, though it's very dark, is that the rates of sexual abuse from the Catholic Church against children is about half the rate as public school teachers against children. So it's all bad, but it's not particularly.
From what I've seen, it hasn't. At least from what I've seen, that's not necessarily true. What I've seen is that...
It's true. I can promise you.
Okay, we'll fact check later. Or right now, actually, we could. But one of the specific reasons, and I'll grant you this, or grant this to the Catholic Church at least, is that the reason why the Catholic Church has higher rates of sexual abuse compared to Protestants is not because Protestants are necessarily doing it less, but it's because the Catholic Church investigates it more. But even
they do investigate it a lot. I think the rate... It depends on which Protestant group you're comparing it to, but... And some Protestant groups.
I do want to go to the question for this side, Farah, Pixie, and Jasmine. Are women oppressed? Are men oppressed? Who is more oppressed? Starting with Farah, and then we'll come this way.
Kind of like patriarchy, I think oppressed is a hefty word. I prefer just the term marginalized, and I think women are marginalized more than men.
Okay.
Didn't we just say that women are graduating college at a higher rate than men? Like there are more women in college than men.
But didn't we also say that the culture, women move in lockstep to male desires in terms of things like hookup culture and just the culture at large? Didn't you also admit that?
I'm not saying women are in a good spot. I'm just saying, how is it that if women are the majority of the population and they're represented as the majority in these apparently desirable places such as universities, you couldn't say they're marginalized because they're the majority, so they're not the margin.
I think you could still be othered even if you're a majority, if there's a louder minority, yes. That's why I didn't use the term oppressed. That's why I used marginalized.
Do you think men are louder than women?
100%. They speak more words per minute. I mean, that's just a fact.
Well, that's because Shapiro brings up the
That's true.
Your answer, Pixie.
Men and women are both oppressed. They're both oppressed in different ways. I do not like playing Oppression Olympics because I think that both...
You can play.
No, I don't want to play. They both have very, very legitimate reasons to feel oppressed. Okay. So that's where I stand.
Jasmine, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think men and women are oppressed, but I think if you're looking at who's more oppressed in a society and you're looking at what metric to use, I think the male-female one is really terrible. I think class and privilege and stuff has a way bigger effect on how oppressed you will be rather than your gender. Like if I was a guy, I think maybe my life would be maybe a little bit worse, maybe a little better. If I was in a different family, it could be different. It just depends on so many factors. But class, I think, is much bigger than men versus women.
That's like the old school leftist view where you focus on class over racial or sexual identity. You know what's weird though is when you look at rates of depression drug use. You would think that it would vary by class. I think of the average person on prescription drugs as like a fair upper middle class white lady with maybe one or two kids in the suburbs somewhere. But it's not. There's actually very little difference among all classes. We're all just depressed and on drugs.
I don't know. I'd be curious to see that exact data point because I also know that it's harder for people like like in the lower classes to be covered properly by health insurance and probably like get proper medication in general.
Well, the lowest classes are on Medicaid. It's kind of that lower middle
and
that
it's
has
like
a little trouble.
the opioid crisis isn't affecting people at Yale and law school. It's like there is a class.
The cocaine crisis is affecting people.
But cocaine people are still highly functioning, good attorneys and whatever on cocaine. You can't really do that as much on fentanyl.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I think class does affect. Especially the kind of drugs you get addicted to and all that.
Well, and especially to your point on class, like the fact that people in the lower socioeconomic classes are much less likely to get married and much more likely to have kids out of wedlock. To me, this is one of the most, bringing it all the way back, this is one of the most evil aspects of feminism, is that a lot of the supposed feminists don't really practice what they preach. In fact, I think a lot of elite liberals don't really practice what they preach because they're more likely to get married, and they're more likely to go to some school, and
They have
obviously
less sex as well, less casual sex.
less casual sex, and they do so. But the way they talk is they say, "No, man, we need total liberation. We need a revolution, man. Whatever, you know." And then, unfortunately, it's the lower socioeconomic classes who buy that garbage, and they ruin their lives.
I agree with you there.
yeah.
I think we need to do a better job of explaining to people like for me, I do work. I don't I don't advocate for everybody to do that.
Why not?
Because I think you have to have a specific type of temperament for it. You have to be willing to understand the consequences for it. Like me, I thought about my values. I thought about who I was, and it aligned with that. If you're like 18 and you don't know what you're doing, I don't know if it's a good option for you to jump into. I don't even think it's a good option for you to jump into marriage either. You have to think about who you are and who your
You want
values
to be
are.
prepared to be married. I thought you were going to say you didn't think it was a good idea for me to jump into sex work, which
I
would
think
have
you'd
been
be
very
fine.
offensive to
I
me.
think you'd be fine. I think you make a lot of money.
Come on, you're going to make
Yeah,
me
you
blush.
two together?
Should he start
A couples page?
What if
Yeah.
Michael Knowles started like a cigar review OnlyFans?
I like that. I was thinking I'd recite Italian poetry on only. I
That
actually
would be
thought
good.
about this.
Do you speak Latin?
Shirtless?
A little bit. Shirtless. All right, calm down.
Whoa, okay. Pump the brakes
married
a
man.
little bit there. Okay.
Do you think you would come to regret doing the
Not me,
OnlyFans?
but I think some people would.
You don't think there's a chance you'll come to regret it?
No. Why would I regret it?
If, say, you wanted to get married and have kids and you found it harder to...
I don't think so
Find a
because I
husband.
think that I typically like men. Like, for instance, I always tell this story. Like, before I didn't have any social media before I started OnlyFans, and I didn't have. And like one guy I was on a date with was like, "Oh, I love that because you're not showing off your body." I just ghosted him. Like, I don't like men like that. I like men that have similar values to me, where they don't correlate modesty with morality and that they don't really care.
Do you think that guys who look at a lot of porn and are very pro porn, do you think they tend to make better or worse husbands?
Well, we know that the ones that
Yeah.
actually have issues with porn, the biggest predictor of that is moral incongruence. So Catholics should not watch porn. It seems to have really negative impacts on your marriages and lives. But if you're not Catholic and you don't have negative attitudes towards porn, you are way less likely to have issues with it.
Do you think that if you watch porn a lot, you're really into it, you're more or less likely to step out on your marriage?
I don't know if there's any data on that.
Well, you said a lot, so you're adding kind of like an
No, upwards
data
of,
would
upwards of
suggest
90% of
overconsumption.
men watch porn. I don't know if men who watch porn are more likely to cheat. I haven't seen anything to indicate that, nor would that even be my...
The social scientific data that I've seen would suggest that regular porn use is associated with all sorts of vices and pathologies, and including marital infidelity. And so that would be one thing you wouldn't want. You wouldn't want your husband sleeping around with other women.
I don't mind if he watches porn, and I think a lot of women don't.
But if what I'm saying is, if watching porn made him less virtuous, and even just the fact that you're trying to cook for the kids, right, and you're trying to do something, and he's just in the bedroom somewhere, selfishly doing something that's kind of shameful, and you don't brag about it, even if you're
I watch porn. What am I supposed? I'm supposed to tell him you don't do it, and I'll do it.
Yeah. Well, no, neither of you should do it. Neither of you should
I
do
want
it.
that clipped.
Neither of you should do it. But you should not let your own personal eccentricities, or call it vices, stop you from recognizing them as vices per se. It's not hypocrisy to have a standard and fail it. And I fear that because we today have suggested that it is, a lot of people recognize their problems with what they're doing. Maybe you like porn a lot, but there are a lot of people who worked in the porn industry who have had terrible outcomes. They leave the industry, they say it was just awful and abusive. And I'm with the negative feminists on this. I think it's really degrading to women. And, another statistic, 97% of the recipients of violence and aggression in pornography are women. It's usually not the men. Maybe in some cases.
That's
but
why
it's usually the
OnlyFans.
women.
You should be pro OnlyFans then, because it eliminates a lot of that.
Democratizing the pornography industry, I don't know. I don't know that would shrink it, which would be my goal. But even
It shrink the abuse, which it has.
It's the most ethical form.
It's the most ethical form
Yeah,
to watch
I don't-
and to
I don't know.
make.
An ethical porn to me is sort of like a vegan lion.
Well,
or
you just said
really
you have to
wet
hold yourself
fire.
to a standard. You're deciding that standard based on your values and your religion.
But I'm coming to my values through reason, I guess is what I'm saying. I think that people have a conscience. I think that, broadly speaking, our faculties of reason can tell us that, we all agree murder is bad, right? And we just think it's objectively wrong. It's not just wrong because we kind of feel it or we've decided it in some social science committee. It's just objectively wrong because there's a transcendent moral order that's objective and we can reason about it. So I think we can all come to certain conclusions.
Then why haven't we? Why?
Well, we have for most of history.
Well, no, murder, we're pretty much like all, and that's an interesting thing. Even abortion, like social attitudes haven't shifted much because murder, people are still like, this is wrong. But things like casual porn, work, our reason is obviously failing. Maybe we malfunctioned evolutionarily in 2024.
Yeah, no, we're fallen for sure. We have all sorts of people still commit murder.
Why
too.
is that reason, whatever reason you're having, why is that not spreading?
Because
why is that not persuasive enough to convince people?
Because we're much less reasonable today than we've been in the past, and because, in fact, a lot of people deny objective truth. I mean, it would seem you've all accepted my premises that I've just articulated, that there is objective truth and a transcendent moral order, and so, you're the creme de la creme, I guess. But a lot of people, if you went onto the street and you said, is there such a thing as objective truth? They would say, no, there's no such thing as objective
and
truth.
there's good arguments, but there's good
self-undermining.
arguments for that. There's good arguments. You could even argue that you subjectively came to the objective truth of Catholicism. You use your subjective opinions to follow that.
Well, no. An opinion is a statement of fact from one's perspective, but it's a statement of objective fact. It's not like a preference. It's not
Why
like
are you
vanilla
not
or
Muslim?
chocolate.
You just didn't find it as compelling. You didn't personally find it as compelling.
Right. Applying my reason to facts, I found one to be more reasonable than the other.
And you
That's
could
objective,
find a very reasonable Muslim who could sit across and maybe in the future debate you here, and they would have.
I mean, to give the Muslims.
Ben Shapiro used his reason to go to.
That man is not a Muslim. To whatever
No, I
else you
know,
wanna
but
call
he thinks Judaism is the truth. So
Yep.
you're all
Yeah,
using it's still a subjective.
Listen, he's a very smart guy, but he gets a few things wrong.
Yeah. Okay.
So sure, people disagree and they come to wrong conclusions plenty of times, sure. But without believing that our reason is somewhat reliable, then we can't even really communicate, right? I mean, there's just no objective reality that would even make this intelligible.
Quick